I spent 35 years deciding who was guilty. Turns out the hardest case was my own. My name is Margaret Holloway. I'm 73 years old, and 3 months ago, I had a life most people would envy. A craftsman-style house 6 blocks from downtown Boulder, with mountain views from my kitchen window, Tuesday book club at the public library, Sunday services at First Presbyterian, where I'd been a member since 1989. Friends who texted me about hiking trails and invited me to dinner parties where we argued about local politics over wine that cost more than my first car. I prosecuted violent crimes in Boulder County for 35 years, put away rapists, murderers, abusers. I was good at my job, maybe too good. The kind of good that meant I brought the courtroom home with me every single night. The kind of good that made me a terrible mother. My daughter Claire is 41 now. We haven't spoken in 7 years. Not since she told me at a Starbucks on Pearl Street that she needed space, that my constant criticism had damaged her, that she couldn't keep trying to earn my approval. I remember the way her hands shook around her latte cup. I remember thinking she was being dramatic, that every parent makes mistakes, that she'd come around eventually. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday morning in late August when my phone started buzzing. 6 texts before I even finished my coffee. Then 12, then 20, all from different numbers. Some from people I hadn't heard from in years. Have you heard Claire's podcast? Oh my God, Margaret, are you okay? I can't believe she would do this to you. My hands went numb. I sat down at my kitchen table, the one I refinished myself 5 years ago, and I typed Claire Holloway podcast into Google. The first result was a Spotify link. Episode 1. The Prosecutor's Daughter. 3 million plays in 4 days. I put in my earbuds. Pressed play. My daughter's voice filled my ears. Calm, measured, devastatingly articulate. This is a story about growing up with a mother who treated our home like a courtroom. Who cross-examined me at age 9 about why I got a B instead of an A. Who told me at 12 that emotions were weakness. Who missed my high school graduation because a sentencing hearing ran late. A mother who chose her career over her child every single time and called it justice. I listened to all 42 minutes. My coffee went cold. Outside my window, a neighbor walked past with a golden retriever, and the world kept turning while mine collapsed. Some of it was true. The graduation, I did miss it. There were nights I came home so wound up from trial prep that I snapped at her for leaving dishes in the sink, for laughing too loud, for existing in a way that required energy I didn't have left to give. I was harsh. I was cold. I made her feel like she was never enough. But some of it wasn't true, or it was true with all the context stripped away, twisted into something darker. She described a childhood of constant emotional terrorism. Claimed I'd told her she was stupid, worthless, unwanted. Said I'd screamed at her daily, that she'd lived in fear, that I'd destroyed her self-worth so thoroughly she'd spent 15 years in therapy just to function. I never called her stupid. I was demanding. Yes. Impatient. But I never told her she was worthless. Did I? The comment section had 17,000 responses, most of them praising Claire's bravery, some calling for me to be investigated, a few suggesting I should lose my pension. Within a week, everything changed. Nancy from book club texted that she didn't think she could make it this month, then next month either. Jenny from church stopped sitting near me during services. By the 3rd Sunday, she'd switched to the early morning service entirely. My hiking group chat went silent. The invitation to the Goldman's annual barbecue never came. I watched my social circle dissolve like sugar in water, slowly then all at once. Episode 2 dropped, The Trials I Couldn't Win. Claire talked about the time I forgot her 14th birthday because I was prepping for a murder trial. True. About the time I told her she was too sensitive and needed to toughen up. Also true. About the time I allegedly locked her in her room for 2 days as punishment for failing a math test. Not true. Never happened. But who would believe me? 5 million plays in 3 days. By episode 3, Claire had launched a GoFundMe. Help me heal from childhood trauma and continue sharing my story. The goal was $20,000. She hit it in 6 hours. By the end of the week, $42,000. People sending money to my daughter for surviving me. I sat in my house, alone, and realized something terrifying. I couldn't remember, not clearly. The early 90s were a blur of case files and court dates, and exhaustion so deep it felt like drowning. Did I lock her in her room? I remember being angry about her grades. I remember feeling like I was failing at everything, work and home both, and taking it out on the person who needed me most. I went to the basement. Started pulling boxes. Found my old diaries. The ones I kept during the hardest years when the job was eating me alive. And there it was. November 1991. My handwriting, shaky from fatigue. Claire asked me to help with her science project tonight. I told her I couldn't, that she needed to figure it out herself, that I wasn't going to hold her hand through everything. She cried. I walked away. What kind of mother am I? I read page after page of my own guilt, my own awareness that I was failing her, that I was choosing wrong again and again, and calling it necessity. The diaries proved she was exaggerating, but they also proved I was exactly the mother she said I was. Cold, harsh, absent. Maybe not a monster, but not innocent either. They removed my name from courtroom 3 with a drill. It took 11 minutes. I watched from the parking lot. I wasn't supposed to be there. I'd driven to the Justice Center to drop off some old files I'd been storing, things that belonged to the county, not to me. But when I pulled into the lot, I saw the maintenance truck, saw the ladder, saw 2 men in county uniforms standing outside the main entrance with a brass plaque in their hands. My plaque. The one they'd installed in 2019 when I retired. Bronze letters on walnut wood. Margaret Holloway, Boulder County Prosecutor, 1984 to 2019. In recognition of 35 years of service to justice and victims' rights, I parked 3 rows back, turned off the engine, watched. The drill whined, high-pitched and angry. The first screw came out in 20 seconds. The second took longer because it had stripped slightly, the driver spinning uselessly until one of the men switched to a larger bit. The plaque tilted to the left, then fell forward. One man caught it before it hit the ground. 11 minutes total. That's how long it took to erase 35 years. Nobody looked around to see if anyone was watching. Nobody hesitated. It was just another Tuesday maintenance job. Remove the old plaque, patch the holes, repaint if necessary. I sat in my car until they drove away. Then I sat there longer because I didn't know where else to go. Claire's podcast was on episode 6 now, The Woman Who Saved Strangers But Destroyed Her Own Daughter. 10 million total downloads. She'd been interviewed on 2 national podcasts. A literary agent had reached out about a book deal. And the county commission had received 400 emails demanding my name be removed from public property. So they removed it. I drove home in silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the sound of my tires on asphalt and my own breathing, which sounded too loud in the empty car. At home, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went to the garage, pulled down the boxes I'd been avoiding. The ones with my old case files, the ones I'd kept copies of even though I wasn't supposed to, the ones that mattered too much to let go. I spread them across my dining room table. 43 cases. All domestic violence. Prosecutions. All convictions. Sarah Mendez, age 29. Husband fractured her jaw in 3 places. She testified even though he'd threatened to kill her family. I held her hand in the hallway outside the courtroom and told her she was the bravest person I'd ever met. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes, guilty on all counts. Patricia O'Connor, age 34. Boyfriend put her in the hospital twice. She was terrified to press charges. I sat with her for 3 hours, explained every step of the process, promised I wouldn't let him near her. She testified. He got 8 years. Jamila Washington, age 41. Ex-husband violated the restraining order 6 times. The 6th time he broke into her house with a baseball bat. I prosecuted him with everything I had. 15 years. She sent me a card afterward. You saved my life. I will never forget you. I read through case after case, saw my handwriting in the margins, notes about witness prep, reminders to check on victims, follow-up dates circled in red ink. I'd saved these women, fought for them, made sure they were heard, made sure they were safe. And then I went home to my own daughter and made her feel unsafe in a completely different way. Not with fists, not with threats, but with coldness, with impossible standards, with the exhaustion and rage I couldn't leave at the office, so I brought it through the front door and let it poison everything. I sat at my table surrounded by evidence of my best work, and I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding for 3 months. Had I become the very thing I fought against? Not an abuser in the legal sense, but someone who used power to control, someone who made another person feel small and afraid, and never good enough. The difference was intent, maybe, or maybe that was just what I told myself to sleep at night. I spent 4 days writing a letter, 7 pages, handwritten in blue ink on cream stationery, addressed to the Boulder County Commission. I didn't defend myself. Didn't explain. Didn't ask for my plaque back. I wrote about the cases I was proud of, the women I'd helped, the life I'd given to that work. And then I wrote about what it cost, how I'd let the darkness of those cases seep into my home, how I'd measured my daughter against impossible standards because I was terrified she'd become a victim, never realizing I was making her one in the process. I admitted I was an imperfect mother. That Claire's pain was real, even if some of her facts weren't. That reputation is just what strangers think of you, but character is what you do when everything falls apart. I mailed the letter. They never responded. It was never made public. I don't know if anyone even read it. 2 weeks later, I put my house on the market, sold it in 4 days to a cash buyer, signed the deed over to the Boulder Women's Shelter, the entire proceeds, $370,000. I packed what fit in my Honda, drove south. Salida, Colorado is small, 6,000 people, mountain views, a river running through downtown. Nobody knows me here, nobody cares about podcasts or plaques or who I used to be. I rent a 1-bedroom cottage 3 blocks from the Arkansas River. On Thursdays, I run a free workshop at the community center. Self-defense legal advice for women over 50. Restraining orders. Estate planning. How to leave when leaving feels impossible. 8 women showed up the first week, 16 the second, last Thursday, 23. I hung a small wooden sign on my porch, made it myself with a router and some paint. The letters aren't perfect, but they're clear enough. Second act's welcome here. Nobody asks about my first act, and I don't tell them. I signed the deed over to a women's shelter while eating cold pot roast alone. It was a Wednesday, October. The kind of crisp Colorado evening where the sky turns purple and gold and you can smell wood smoke from someone's fireplace 3 houses down. I'd made too much pot roast, like I always did, forgetting I was the only one eating it, forgetting there was no one coming home. The lawyer sat across from me at my kitchen table, Jennifer Park, mid-40s, kind eyes. She'd handled the paperwork pro bono when I explained what I wanted to do. She slid the final documents across the table, pointed to the signature lines. "You're absolutely sure about this, Margaret? Once you sign, there's no going back. This house, all equity, Everything transfers to Boulder Safe House, $370,000. I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I'm sure. I signed. She witnessed. It was done. The house where I'd raised Claire, where she took her first steps in the hallway, where I taught her to ride a bike in the driveway and she skinned her knee and I kissed it better, where we decorated Christmas trees and argued about curfews and existed in that complicated space between love and damage that all families live in. Gone. Given away. Not to Claire, to women who needed it more. Jennifer gathered the papers, smiled sadly. You're doing a good thing. I nodded. Walked her to the door. Came back to my cold pot roast and ate 3 more bites before I couldn't anymore. My phone buzzed at 9:47 that night. A text from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. Claire had blocked me 2 years ago, but she'd found a way around it when she needed to. I heard what you did. We need to talk. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I turned off my phone. She showed up the next morning. I was packing boxes in the living room when I heard the car door slam. Looked out the window, saw her walking up the path I'd shoveled every winter for 41 years. She knocked. I didn't answer. She knocked again. Harder. Mom. I know you're in there. Open the door. I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes and memories and let her knock. Eventually she stopped. I heard her voice through the door. Angry now. You had no right. That house is mine. You raised me there. It's part of my story, part of my healing. You can't just give it away to strangers. I closed my eyes. I'm getting a lawyer, Mom. You can't do this. That house should be mine. But legally, it was mine. Bought before her father left. Paid off with my salary. My name on the deed. My choice, what to do with it. And I chose to give it to women who actually needed shelter, not just a symbol. Claire stayed on my porch for 20 minutes. I counted. Then I heard her footsteps on the stairs. Her car door, the engine starting, the sound of gravel under tires as she drove away. Episode 8 dropped 3 days later. The final betrayal, when your abuser destroys your inheritance. 12 million plays in the first week. Claire told the world I'd stolen her birthright, that the house was supposed to be hers, that giving it away was one last act of cruelty, one final way to control her, to punish her for telling the truth. She cried on the podcast. Real tears. I could hear them in her voice. I thought maybe, after everything, there would be some acknowledgement. Some attempt to make amends. Instead, she gave away the only piece of my childhood I had left, to strangers, to prove a point. The comments section exploded. Thousands of people calling me a narcissist, a sociopath, the worst mother in America. I didn't respond. Didn't defend myself. Didn't tell my side. What would I say? That I gave the house to women fleeing violence because I spent 35 years prosecuting their abusers and it was the only thing I had left worth giving? That Claire didn't need the house, she needed healing, and those were 2 different things? That sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to participate in their anger? I packed the rest of my things in silence, hired movers, watched them load up the truck with furniture I'd picked out decades ago when I still believed I was building something that would last. I kept almost nothing. A few books, some clothes, my diplomas, though I wasn't sure why, and one thing I couldn't explain, even to myself. The original house key, the one from 1984 when we first moved in. Brass, worn smooth from 40 years of use. I put it in a small wooden box my father made me when I was 12, locked it, put it in the bottom of my suitcase. I didn't know why I kept it. I would never go back. But maybe we all need to carry one small piece of what we lost. Grand Junction is 5 hours west. Smaller than Boulder. Hotter in summer. Different mountains. red rock instead of granite. Nobody here knows about podcasts or prosecutors or daughters who turn their mothers into villains for an audience. I rent a studio apartment on the 3rd floor. 420 square feet. 1 room, kitchenette, bathroom. A balcony that faces east. So I get morning Sunday. I planted tulip bulbs in containers 2 weeks ago. Red and yellow. They won't bloom until spring, but I'll be here to see them. I'm not going anywhere. I counsel women now, nationwide, via Zoom, pro bono legal advice for women over 50 facing abuse, divorce, estate issues, the kind of work I should have been doing all along maybe. 3 times a week, I sit at my small desk and talk to women who are scared and brave and trying to rebuild lives they thought were over. I tell them second acts are possible, that you can lose everything and still wake up the next morning, that peace is quieter than reputation but infinitely more valuable. I don't tell them about Claire, about the podcast or the house or the plaque they took down with a drill. But sometimes, late at night, I open the wooden box, take out the brass key, hold it in my palm until it warms to my body temperature. I never go back. But I remember. And maybe that's enough. I taught her how to argue a case. I never taught her when to stop. Claire was 7 years old the first time I showed her how to build an argument. We were at the kitchen table. She wanted to stay up past bedtime to finish a book. Instead of just saying no like most parents, I made her present her case. Give me 3 reasons why I should allow this. Use evidence. Convince me. She thought for a minute. Then she said, 1, it's Friday so I can sleep late tomorrow. 2, I only have 12 pages left and stopping now would be torture. 3, you always say reading is important, so this proves I care about learning. I smiled. Let her stay up. Good work, counselor. I spent the next 15 years teaching her how to think like a lawyer, how to find the weakness in any argument, how to present facts in the most compelling way, how to control a narrative, how to make people feel something, then use that emotion to win, how to cross-examine, how to establish credibility, how to destroy it. I taught her every trick I knew because I thought I was preparing her for a hard world, teaching her to be strong, to fight, to never let anyone diminish her. I never imagined she would use those skills against me. Episode 9 was called Anatomy of Abuse, a Prosecutor's Playbook. Claire broke down every manipulation tactic she claimed I used. She structured it like a legal brief, presented evidence, called witnesses, friends from high school who remembered me as cold and distant at parent-teacher conferences, built her case piece by piece, fact after twisted fact, until even I started to doubt my own memories. She was brilliant, absolutely devastating. She'd learned from the best. She'd learned from me. I listened to that episode 3 times. Not because I enjoyed the pain, but because I was watching a masterclass in persuasion, and I recognized every single technique. The way she opened with a personal anecdote to establish emotional connection, the way she used specific details to build credibility, the way she anticipated counter-arguments and dismantled them before I could even make them, the way she pivoted from logic to emotion, exactly when the audience needed to feel something instead of think something. It was textbook. It was perfect. It was me, 30 years ago, in courtroom 3, destroying a defense attorney who thought he could outsmart me. I sat in my Grand Junction apartment with tears running down my face, not from sadness, but from a strange kind of pride mixed with absolute horror. I'd created this. I'd sharpened this weapon, handed it to my daughter, and now it was pointed directly at my throat. She'd become a sharper, younger, more ruthless version of me. And I had no one to blame but myself. The realization hit me like cold water. I hadn't just failed Claire as a mother, I'd succeeded as a teacher. I'd taught her to win at any cost, to never back down, to destroy your opponent so thoroughly they can't get back up. And now, I was the opponent. I'd raised a prosecutor, and prosecutors don't forgive, they convict. I made my decision on a Thursday in November. Cold rain against the windows. Gray sky. The kind of day that feels like an ending. I changed my phone number, deleted my email, created new accounts under a different name, closed every door she could reach me through. No contact, complete, finale. Not out of anger, out of acceptance. I couldn't fix this, couldn't win her back, couldn't argue my case better than she argued hers. The only move I had left was to stop playing. To let her have her victory, her platform, her truth, distorted as it was. And to finally walk away. I drove to New Mexico in December. Taos, high desert, mountains in the distance, a landscape so different from Boulder it felt like another planet. I rented a small adobe casita on the edge of town, 1 bedroom, Kiva fireplace, a view of sagebrush and sky so big it made my problems feel appropriately small. I started taking watercolor classes at the community center. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, 12 other students, mostly retirees like me, learning to paint the landscape that surrounded us. I was terrible at first. My mountains looked like lumpy triangles. My skies bled into my earth tones until everything turned muddy brown. But my teacher, Rita, a 78-year-old former art professor from Santa Fe, was patient. "You're trying to control it too much, Margaret. Watercolor requires surrender. Let the water do what it wants. Your job is to guide, not dominate." I thought about that for a long time. On March 8th, Claire's 42nd birthday, I bought a postcard at a shop downtown. A simple landscape, desert sunset, red and orange and gold. I wrote 4 sentences in careful handwriting. "I release you. You are free. I hope you find peace. I am learning to be gentle." I signed it. A woman learning to be gentle. No return address, Taos postmark, that's all. I mailed it and walked home through the plaza, past tourists and artists and people living lives that had nothing to do with podcasts or past mistakes or daughters who would never forgive. I do it every year now, same day, different postcard, same message. I don't know if she reads them, I don't know if she throws them away. It doesn't matter. I'm not sending them to change her mind, I'm sending them to change mine. To remind myself that the sharpest argument isn't always the right one, that winning isn't the same as healing, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to fight back. Claire won. She got the platform, the money, the public sympathy, the book deal. And I got something I never had when I was winning cases in courtroom 3. Peace. Silence. And a slowly improving ability to paint mountains that actually look like mountains. I used to run Mount Sanitas every dawn. Then one morning I stopped halfway and never went back. For 35 years, that trail was mine. 1.8 miles up. 1,500 feet of elevation gain. 42 minutes on a good day. 53 on a bad one. I knew every switchback, every loose rock, every spot where the morning light hit the red sandstone just right. I started running it in 1984, right after I made prosecutor. The job was crushing me. 3 hours of sleep, case files stacked on my kitchen counter, nightmares about victims I couldn't save. Running was the only thing that quieted my mind. The only place where I wasn't deciding who was guilty or innocent. I was just a woman with burning lungs and tired legs, climbing toward the sky. I ran it the morning after I prosecuted my first murder case. I ran it the day my divorce was finalized. I ran it the week after Claire told me she was moving to California and wouldn't be coming back. I ran it in snow, in rain, in heat that made my vision swim. I ran it when I was healthy, and when I had bronchitis so bad I coughed blood at the summit. Mount Sanitas wasn't just exercise, it was church, therapy. The one conversation I had every day that didn't require words. Until Episode 4. Claire mentioned it in passing, barely 30 seconds of audio, but it was enough. My mother ran Mount Sanitas every single morning. Rain or shine. She never missed. But she missed my dance recitals, my school plays, my graduation. She had time for a mountain, just not for me. 2 days later, I was halfway up the trail when I heard it. Oh my God, is that her? I turned. 2 women in their 30s, expensive leggings, matching water bottles. One of them had her phone out. It is, that's the prosecutor. Claire Holloway's mom. Click. The sound of a camera. I stood there, frozen, sweat running down my face, heart pounding from exertion and now from something else. Fear. Shame. Exposure. How could you do that to your own daughter? One of them said, not yelling, just loud enough to make sure I heard. I turned and walked back down the mountain. Didn't run. Walked. I never went back. For 3 weeks I stayed inside, watched the sunrise from my window, felt my body get softer, felt my mind get louder without the daily ritual to quiet it. I tried running in other places, trails farther from town where nobody knew me, but it felt wrong, like trying to pray in someone else's church, and there was always the fear that someone would recognize me, that I'd hear the click of a camera, that I'd see myself on social media with some cruel caption. So I stopped running. I started walking instead, not for exercise, just to move. Slow loops around my neighborhood in Grand Junction, head down, earbuds in even though I wasn't listening to anything. One morning, I started crying halfway through my walk, not about anything specific, just everything. The podcast, the plaque, the house, Claire, the life I'd had and lost, the mountain I'd never climb again. I stood on a corner near a coffee shop and cried while people walked past. Some stared. Most didn't. A woman asked if I was okay. I nodded, kept walking. After that, I cried on my walks a lot. It became part of the routine. Walk, breathe, cry, go home, make tea, repeat. I learned that crying in public isn't the end of the world. That most people are too absorbed in their own lives to care. That grief doesn't need privacy to be real. I learned to be slow, to breathe, to exist in my body without punishing it. In January, I walked past a yoga studio, small, local, a handwritten sign in the window, gentle flow, all ages, all bodies, all welcome. I went in. The teacher was maybe 60. Soft voice. She didn't ask my name. Didn't ask why I was there. Just pointed to a mat and said, "Welcome." I could barely touch my toes, could barely hold downward dog for 10 seconds, but for the first time in months, my body felt like mine again. I went back. Twice a week. Then 3 times. Then 4. In March, I asked the teacher about the 200-hour training course advertised on the bulletin board. She smiled. It's intensive. Weekends for 6 months. Most people drop out. I'm 73, I said. I'm used to difficult things. I started in April. I was the oldest person in the class by 20 years. My knees hurt, my back hurt, everything hurt, but I kept showing up. We learned anatomy, philosophy, how to modify poses for different bodies, how to hold space for people who were hurting without trying to fix them. That last part was the hardest. My entire career had been about fixing, solving, winning. Yoga taught me something different, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is witness someone's pain without trying to argue it away. I graduated in October. 200 hours. I cried when they gave me the certificate. Cried harder than I'd cried on any of those morning walks. Now I teach. Free classes. Tuesday and Thursday evenings. At the community center. Yoga for women over 60. We move slowly. We breathe. We hold gentle poses. And don't apologize for modifications. 15 women came the first week, 23 the second. Last week, 31. They're runners with bad knees, office workers with chronic back pain, widows learning to live alone, mothers estranged from their children who never say it out loud, but I see it in their eyes. At the end of every class, I say the same thing. Strength is not always speed. Sometimes strength is showing up when everything in you says stay home. Sometimes it's choosing the easier version of the pose. Sometimes it's just breathing. I'll never run Mount Sanitas again. I'll never feel that particular kind of freedom. That burning exhaustion. That summit silence. But I found something else. Something slower, gentler, something that doesn't require me to climb away from my problems at dawn. Something that lets me stand still and call it enough. I gave away $1 million anonymously so women my age could finally become the lawyers they always wanted to be. The money came from everywhere and nowhere, my pension after 35 years, the savings I'd accumulated living alone in a house that was paid off, the sale of my car before I moved to New Mexico, small investments my father left me that had grown over 40 years. I'd lived carefully, never extravagantly, never traveled much, never bought things I didn't need. And suddenly, at 73, I had more money than I knew what to do with. The house proceeds went to Boulder's safe house, $370,000. But I still had nearly $1.2 million sitting in accounts I barely looked at. Money I'd earned, money that was legally mine, money that felt like poison. Every time I checked my balance, I thought about Claire, about the $42,000 strangers gave her on GoFundMe, about the book deal she signed, about how she'd turned our broken relationship into profit. I didn't want to be someone who kept money just because I could. I didn't want my legacy to be a bank account and a podcast about what a terrible mother I was. I wanted to do something that mattered. In February, I called a lawyer in Denver, not Jennifer Park this time, someone who specialized in trusts and foundations, someone who could help me make something good out of everything I'd lost. His name was David Chen, 62, patient, asked good questions. What exactly do you want to fund? I'd thought about this for weeks. Law school scholarships. But not for 22-year-olds fresh out of undergrad, for women over 50. Women who always wanted to be lawyers but life got in the way. Women who raised kids or took care of parents or worked jobs that paid the bills but killed their dreams. Women who think it's too late. David nodded slowly. That's specific. And beautiful. How much are we talking about? $1 million. Set up as an endowment. Annual scholarships funded by the interest and growth. I want it to last forever. And you want to remain anonymous? Completely. No name. No recognition. Just a note that says it's from a retired prosecutor who believes it's never too late. We spent 3 months setting it up, creating the legal structure, establishing selection criteria, partnering with law schools that would honor the intent, making sure every penny would go to tuition, books, living expenses for women who were brave enough to start over. The Holloway Foundation would have been too obvious, so we called it something else. Something simple. The second chapter, Legal Scholarship Fund. We launched it quietly in May. No press release, no announcement, just a notification to 50 law schools across the country that funding was available for qualified applicants. The first year, we gave scholarships to 8 women. Diane, 53, from Cleveland. Worked as a paralegal for 28 years. Always dreamed of being a lawyer but couldn't afford it when she was young. 2 kids, 1 grandchild. Starting law school in the fall. Patricia, 57, from Atlanta. Survived domestic violence. Wanted to become a prosecutor to help other women. been working at Walmart for 15 years to save money. Rosa, 61, from Phoenix, immigrated from Mexico at 19, raised 4 kids alone, always wanted to practice immigration law. Finally ready. 8 women, 8 second chances, $60,000 each for 3 years of law school. Full ride, every expense covered. I read their applications in my casita in Taos and cried so hard I had to put them down and walk away. Came back an hour later and read them again. These women were me, or who I could have been if life had dealt different cards, or who I should have been if I'd been gentler, kinder, more forgiving of imperfection. They were starting over. And I was helping. 3 years later in May, I flew to Cleveland, booked a cheap hotel, wore sunglasses and a hat I bought at Target, sat in the back row of Case Western Reserve Law School's graduation ceremony. Diane walked across that stage at 56 years old. Gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, smile so wide it looked like it hurt. When they called her name, they mentioned the scholarship. Diane Martinez, graduating with honors, recipient of the second chapter legal scholarship, sponsored by a retired prosecutor who believes it's never too late. The auditorium erupted in applause. Standing ovation. Diane cried. Her kids cried. Her granddaughter, maybe 6 years old, waved a homemade sign that said Grandma the Lawyer. I clapped until my hands hurt. Nobody knew I was there. Nobody looked at the 76-year-old woman in the back row with tears streaming down her face. I was invisible, anonymous, free. And for the first time since episode 1 dropped, I felt like I'd done something right. I do it every year now. Fly to different cities, different graduations, sit in the back, watch women in their 50s and 60s walk across stages they thought they'd never reach. Last year I went to 4 graduations. This year, 6. Next year, we'll have 12 recipients graduating. 12 women who were told they were too old, too tired, too late. 12 women who decided that wasn't true. I never introduce myself, never tell anyone who I am, never ask for recognition or gratitude. But I keep a folder in my desk, photos I take from the back row on my phone, grainy, distant, but clear enough to see their faces, their joy, their impossible, hard-won triumph. Claire has her podcast, her book, her platform, her version of the truth that made her famous and me infamous. And I have this. 8 women this year. 12 next year. 15 the year after. Women who will spend the next 30 years prosecuting abusers, defending victims, fighting for justice. Women who got a second chapter because I finally understood that redemption isn't about defending yourself. It's about using what you have left to open doors you wish someone had opened for you. The scholarship fund will outlive me. We'll keep creating lawyers long after I'm gone. Long after the podcast is forgotten. Long after Claire and I are both just names on old documents. And somewhere, in the back row of a law school graduation, there will be an empty seat where I used to sit. But the clapping will go on. For 41 years, I sat in the same pew. Then one Sunday, 3 women slid 6 inches away from me. Row 7, left side, 3rd seat in. That was my spot at First Presbyterian Church in Boulder. I'd claimed it in 1984, the week after I moved to Colorado, every Sunday at 10:30. Through blizzards and heat waves and the Sunday after September 11th when the sanctuary was so packed, people stood in the aisles. I sang hymns from that pew, prayed, cried when Pastor Williams gave the eulogy for my father, sat through countless sermons about forgiveness and grace and loving your neighbor. That pew was the one place I thought I was safe, the one community that preached unconditional love and actually meant it. I was wrong. It started small. Jenny Matthews stopped sitting next to me. We'd shared that pew for 11 years. She'd grip my hand during the Lord's Prayer. We'd have coffee after service and talk about our gardens, our books, the slow, quiet rhythm of our aging lives. 3 weeks after episode 2 dropped, she texted me. "I think I need some space to process everything I've heard. I hope you understand." I did understand. I understood that space was permanent. The next Sunday I sat alone. Jenny was 4 rows back. She didn't make eye contact. The Sunday after that, 3 women from the choir arrived early. They always sat in row 7, right side. That morning they saw me and hesitated, whispered to each other, then slid into row 8 instead. Physical distance, 6 feet. But it felt like a canyon. By October, my entire pew was empty. Just me and the hymnals and the morning light coming through the stained glass window depicting the Good Samaritan helping a stranger on the road. I kept coming. Told myself it didn't matter. That church wasn't about other people. It was about God, about faith, about showing up even when it hurt. But it did matter. Because when you sit alone in a sanctuary full of people, you're not just physically alone. You're marked. You're the woman everyone knows about. The woman whose daughter made her famous for all the wrong reasons. The woman whose sin, real or exaggerated, has been broadcast to millions. The woman nobody wants to sit next to because pain might be contagious. In November, Pastor Williams asked if we could talk. We met in his office after service. He was kind, careful, chose his words like he was diffusing a bomb. "Margaret, I want you to know you're always welcome here. But I've had several members express concern. They're uncomfortable. Some have asked if perhaps you might consider finding another church home for a while, just until things settle down." I stared at him. This man who preached about Jesus eating with tax collectors and sinners, about radical inclusion, about leaving the 99 sheep to find the one that was lost. "You're asking me to leave. I'm suggesting it might be easier for everyone if you took some time away." I stood up, walked out, never went back. For 3 weeks I didn't pray at all, felt nothing, just anger and emptiness and the bitter understanding that institutions always choose the crowd over the outcast, no matter what they preach on Sunday mornings. Then one Saturday I sat on my couch in my apartment in Grand Junction, morning light through the window, coffee cooling on the table, and I prayed. Not formal prayer, not scripted words, just talking to whatever might be listening. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if you're even there. I don't know if I deserve forgiveness or if I should keep punishing myself. I'm tired. I'm so tired. And I don't know how to do this alone. I cried. Sat in silence. Waited for something. Nothing dramatic happened. No burning bush, no voice from heaven, just quiet. And the strange, unexpected sensation that maybe quiet was enough. I started praying every morning. On my couch. Sometimes for 5 minutes. Sometimes for an hour. No hymns. No liturgy. Just me and my coffee and the attempt to be honest about who I was and who I'd been and who I wanted to become. It was more real than 41 years of First Presbyterian ever was. In March I drove to Ouray, tiny mountain town, Box Canyon surrounded by peaks, tourist destination in summer but mostly quiet in spring. I was passing through, stopping for lunch, when I saw a small sign outside a community building. Silent meeting, Sundays 10 a.m., all welcome. Quaker meditation. I'd heard of it but never tried it. The next Sunday I went. 8 people in a simple room, folding chairs in a circle, no altar, no cross, no pastor. We sat in silence for an hour. That was it. If someone felt moved to speak, they could. But mostly we just Saturday. No one asked my name. No one asked why I was there. No one knew about Claire or the podcast or the plaque they took down with a drill. I was just another person sitting in silence, trying to find something sacred in the quiet. I cried 20 minutes in, tears running down my face. No one looked. No one comforted me. No one slid 6 inches away. They just let me cry. Let me exist in my pain without needing to fix it or judge it or understand it. After an hour we stood, shook hands. Someone said thank you for being here. That was all. I've gone every Sunday since, moved to Ouray permanently in April, rented a cabin on the edge of town, joined the silent meeting. We still don't talk much. I know some names now: Betty, John, Maria, but we don't share our stories, don't explain our wounds. We just sit together in silence and trust that's enough. For the first time in my life, I feel something sacred without needing anyone to confirm I'm a good person. Without needing to earn it, defend it, prove it. Just silence. And the shared understanding that we're all broken. And that's enough to be holy. I wrote Claire a 12-page apology. Then I burned it in the fireplace and watched the smoke rise. It took me 3 months to write. January through March. Winter in Ouray. Snow piling up outside my cabin window. Me at the kitchen table with a pen and lined paper, trying to find words that could undo 41 years of damage. I started over 17 times. The first draft was too defensive. The second was too apologetic, like I was groveling. The third read like a legal brief, all facts and no heart. The fourth was too emotional, pages of tears and regret that felt manipulative even to me. I worked on it every morning, 2 hours before the sun came up, coffee going cold, my handwriting getting shakier as exhaustion set in. I wanted it to be perfect, wanted to acknowledge every hurt without making excuses, wanted to own my mistakes without accepting blame for the lies, wanted to tell her I loved her without sounding like I was asking for something in return. I wanted to give her the one thing I thought might heal us both. The truth, my truth, the whole complicated mess of it. By March I had 12 pages, single-spaced. Blue ink. My best handwriting. I started with the beginning. With how excited I was when she was born. How I held her in the hospital. And promised to protect her from everything. How that promise slowly twisted into something sharp and controlling because I saw danger everywhere and thought discipline was the same as love. I wrote about the cases that haunted me. The women I couldn't save. The children who testified and then went back to their abusers. How I brought that darkness home and let it poison our kitchen, our living room, the space where she was supposed to feel safe. I wrote about the mornings I was too tired to make her breakfast, so she ate cereal alone at age 8, about the parent-teacher conferences I missed, about the time she asked me to help with her history project and I told her to figure it out herself because I had a trial starting in the morning. I wrote about her 14th birthday, the one I forgot, how I came home at 9 p.m. and she was sitting in the dark with a cake she'd made herself. How I said, "Oh honey, I'm so sorry," and she just nodded and cut herself a slice and didn't cry until I left the room. I wrote about the unrealistic standards, the constant criticism, the way I treated her like a hostile witness instead of a child who needed encouragement. I wrote about finding my diaries, about reading my own words from 1,991 and realizing I'd known even then that I was failing her, that I'd chosen wrong again and again and convinced myself it was temporary, that I'd make it up to her later, that she'd understand when she was older. I apologized for all of it, every sharp word, every missed moment. Every time I chose work over her and called it sacrifice when really it was just easier to prosecute strangers than to be vulnerable with my own daughter. And then I wrote about the podcast, about the lies mixed in with the truth, about how I'd found proof she'd exaggerated, invented, twisted facts to make a better story. But I told her I forgave her for that too, because I taught her that winning mattered more than truth, that a good narrative was more powerful than nuance, that the world was divided into victims and perpetrators, and there was no room for complicated people who were both. 12 pages, 3 months, every word chosen carefully, every sentence revised until it was exactly right. I read it through one final time on a Tuesday morning in late March, sat at my table with weak sunlight coming through the window and tears dripping onto the paper, smudging the ink. And then I understood something that broke my heart all over again. Claire didn't want this letter. She didn't want my apology, my truth, my carefully crafted attempt at reconciliation. She wanted the story, the podcast, the book deal, the platform, the victim narrative that made her sympathetic and me monstrous. An apology would complicate that, would introduce gray areas, would force her audience to consider that maybe I wasn't purely evil, that maybe our relationship was complicated, that maybe we were both hurt and both hurtful. It would ruin the story. And the story was worth more than the truth. I folded the letter, put it in an envelope, addressed it, stamped it. Then I sat there for an hour, staring at it. Finally I stood up, walked to the fireplace, lit a match. I held the letter over the flames, watched the corner catch, watched fire eat through 3 months of work, 12 pages of my heart, every word I'd agonized over. I watched it burn, watched the smoke rise up the chimney and disappear into the Colorado sky. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It felt like release. The next week I moved to Montrose. Bigger than Ouray. Warmer. A town where I could disappear into ordinariness. I rented a small house with a backyard. Overgrown, neglected. Previous tenant hadn't cared about the garden. But there were rose bushes, 5 of them, bare and tangled and half dead. I almost had them removed. Then I remembered the ashes. I'd saved them. Scooped them out of the fireplace into a glass jar. Carried them with me. Didn't know why. Now I knew. I pruned the roses back to almost nothing, fed them, watered them, dug the ashes into the soil around their roots. Every last bit of that letter ground into the dirt, becoming part of something that could grow. In May they bloomed. Pink, red, white, yellow. One coral-colored rose so beautiful, it made me cry. Every morning I sit with my coffee and look at them. Every spring when they bloom again, fuller and stronger than the year before, I whisper the same thing. This is my apology. It grows instead of wounds. Claire will never read the letter, will never know how hard I tried to find the right words. But these roses know. They grow from the ashes of everything I wanted to say. They bloom without requiring forgiveness. They're beautiful without needing anyone to witness them. And that's enough. People still call me Margaret Holloway. I just don't turn around anymore. It happened 3 times last week. Once at the grocery store in Montrose. Once at the post office. Once on Main Street when I was walking to the library. Margaret Holloway? Is that you? I kept walking, didn't pause, didn't look back, just kept my pace steady and my eyes forward like I hadn't heard anything at all. Because Margaret Holloway doesn't live here. She died somewhere between Boulder and the life I'm living now. She's a ghost, a name attached to a podcast. A woman strangers think they know because they listen to 42 minutes of someone else's pain. I don't answer to her anymore. The small losses started before I even left Boulder, little cuts that added up to amputation. Hate mail, not much at first, then more, then so much I stopped opening envelopes I didn't recognize, people I'd never met telling me I deserved to die alone, that I was a monster, that they hoped I suffered the way I'd made my daughter suffer. I threw them away unopened after a while, but I always knew what they said. The coffee shop on Walnut Street, where I'd gone every Saturday for 19 years. The barista who knew my order. Large Americano, room for cream. She'd have it ready before I reached the counter. One Saturday in September, she looked right through me. I stood there for 30 seconds before I realized she was pretending I didn't exist. Someone behind me in line cleared their throat. I left without ordering. The flower stand at the farmer's market. I'd bought tulips there every Sunday in spring. The vendor was a woman named Helen, maybe 70. We'd talk about gardening, weather, the mountains. She saw me coming in October, turned her back, started rearranging bouquets that were already perfectly arranged. I stood there for a full minute before I understood. She'd rather lose a sale than acknowledge me. I stopped going to the farmer's market. All the small rituals that made a life. The familiar faces. The places where people knew my name and smiled when I walked in. Gone. Erased. Like I'd never existed. Or worse, like I existed only as the villain in someone else's story. By November, I couldn't walk down Pearl Street without feeling eyes on me. Whispers. Phones raised. The constant awareness that I was being watched, judged, documented. I left Boulder the week before Thanksgiving, packed my car in the dark, drove away from the only home I'd known for 41 years. I went to Crested Butte because nobody knows me there. Because it's small enough to be peaceful but big enough to be anonymous. Because the mountains are different and the sky is different. And I could wake up and not remember, just for a moment, who I used to be. I applied for a library card under my maiden name, Margaret Hollis, the name I had before I married, before law school, before I became the prosecutor, before I became the mother who failed. The librarian didn't look twice, just handed me the card and said, "Welcome to Crested Butte, Margaret." It felt like being born again. I got a job at that library 3 months later, part-time, shelving books, helping patrons find what they need. It's quiet work, gentle work, the kind of work where nobody cares who you used to be. I rent a small cabin at the edge of town, 1 bedroom, a garden plot in the back that was overgrown when I moved in. I spent March clearing it, planted tomatoes and peppers and zucchini in April, watched them grow through summer. There's something holy about growing food, about putting seeds in the ground and trusting they'll become something you can eat, about tending things that are alive and fragile and entirely dependent on your care. I got better at it. In May, I fostered 2 cats from the local shelter. Sisters, Tabby and Gray. They'd been returned twice. Too shy, the paperwork said. Won't warm up to people. They hid under my bed for 3 weeks. I left food out, talked to them softly, didn't try to force anything. Eventually they came out. Now they sleep on my couch, follow me to the garden, sit on the windowsill, and watch birds. We're all recovering from something, we just don't talk about it. Last week I was downtown, coming out of the hardware store with soil amendments for the garden. A woman walking past stopped dead. Oh my God. Margaret? Margaret Holloway? I looked at her. Tourist, probably. Fleece vest. Expensive sunglasses. The kind of person who listens to podcasts on long drives. She stared at me, waiting for confirmation, for me to become the person she thought she recognized. I smiled. Polita. Distant. Sorry. Wrong person. And I walked away. She called after me. Wait, I'm sure it's you, from the podcast, Claire Holloway's mother. I kept walking, didn't turn around, didn't explain, didn't defend. Margaret Holloway was someone I used to be. She wore suits and prosecuted criminals and raised a daughter badly and lost everything. Margaret Hollis shelves books and grows tomatoes and fosters shy cats and sleeps through the night. They're not the same person. Peace isn't being proven innocent. It's not winning the argument or changing minds or getting people to see your side of the story. Peace is walking away from your own name. It's planting seeds in soil and trusting they'll grow. It's feeding cats that were given up on and watching them learn to trust again. It's realizing that reputation is just what strangers think, and strangers don't live in your kitchen, or see your garden, or know what you've become in the quiet spaces where nobody's watching. I don't need anyone to call me innocent. I just need to stop answering to guilty.